Okay, hi, I'm Megan McCormick, and my friend Camilla Chee here. The two of us are current grad students at BU Wheelock, and we are here today to interview the illustrious Professor Chris Leider.
Oh, thank you for such a vibrant introduction. Nice use of adjectives. So I'm Professor Chris Leider, and I am so excited to just have a conversation with Camilla and Megan. I've had the privilege of having them in two classes, and they're delightful. And so to those of you watching, welcome to BU Wheelock, and I'll just let Camilla and Megan get started. So hello.
Thanks, Chris. We're so excited to interview you. And I feel like we've learned a lot about your background from being in two classes with you. You've been like really open with us. And we wanted to know a little more, like, how did you get to where you are? How did Professor Leider become Professor Leider?
Okay, that's a fun question. Well, I guess we could start from the very beginning, maybe not the very beginning, but something that is, I think, interesting and useful for folks to know is, so I'm a second generation immigrant. My family's originally from the Philippines, and I grew up on an island in Alaska. And so being a second generation immigrant, the first in my family to attend college in the United States, coming from a bilingual home, and growing up on a geographically isolated space, that informs like the way that I walk through the world and think about life. And one of the things I think that was really a defining moment in my life to kind of where I got to be now goes back to when I was actually in kindergarten. I think Camilla and Megan, you've both heard this story before, but I grew up in a bilingual home, and when I started going to school, one of the things that one of my teachers had told my parents was, that it would be best for me and my academic development and everything if we primarily just use the English language. And unfortunately, that's a trend we still see today, right? Where bilingual families of color, immigrant families, are often told like, to prioritize English, often at, the sacrifice of like the home language, which is just really sad and unfortunate. And so for me, like one of the reasons I wanted to be a teacher was to fight that narrative, right? Those misconceptions. It makes me deeply sad still today that I never had the opportunity to learn how to read and write in the first language that was ever spoken to me. Like that still makes me sad. And that's, I think, what brought me to wanting to be a researcher and a professor. Does that answer your question a bit?
Yeah, I think so. I think when I talk about my own teaching, I feel like my upbringing is such a big part of that. And hearing you talk about that feels like so important. And
yeah,
I think as a student helps me understand like, this is like not just something that's abstract. Like this is important to me personally, and it's important to you personally.
Absolutely. And, it's interesting because I always knew I wanted to work in education. And, the reason I went to graduate school initially for my master's was I was doing some curriculum development with my school, and I essentially was like, I don't really know what I'm doing. So I was like, maybe going to grad school would be like a good idea. And, and I'm from, originally from Alaska, and at the time I was living in Oregon out west, and I moved to Boston, and I went to graduate school at BC, so like down the street at Boston College. And I came and I was here to do like this 1-year master program. And by like a very fortunate coincidence, I was invited to join a research team. And me, in my very naive, like, I'm here for a 1-year master's program and then moving back to Oregon. This was like 13 years ago. That didn't happen, obviously. But I said, no, thank you. I was like, I'm actually, like I'm teaching part-time in a language school, and I'm really just like wanting to focus on school so that I can finish as soon as possible, so that I can go back to working full-time. And the person that had reached out to me, who was a professor, was like, well, okay, you might find it useful to know that joining our research team, like if we hire you, comes with a living stipend and tuition remission. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'm interested in that. And the reason that they had reached out to me was actually on my CV. It said that I spoke Spanish, and they were doing work and needed to someone who spoke Spanish for interviewing families. And the reason I'm sharing this is, like I didn't know, not really, like I didn't know what research was, or that I could do that, like I didn't. And that's one of the things I learned. So I joined the research team, and I would have to sit in these research meetings, and doctoral students were in there, and they would ask questions about things, and then they'd like add stuff to the project. And I one day was just like, so you ask questions about how kids learn math, and then you try and answer that, and then you use that information to like inform best practices. And they were like, yes. And I said, I want to do that. I didn't know that was a job. I want to do that for bilingual and immigrant kids. How do I do that? And that's how I kind of got on the path to then start doing research and apply for a PhD program. And that's also part of my story of how I became a professor later.
So you just mentioned BC and first year master's program and then the research. So can you tell us a little bit more, like what parts of grad school do you really remember? Like what are you carrying with you now into the work that you do today?
Oh, that's a great question. So one that I'm reminded about like all the time, and I see like you and Camilla and other folks, is my relationships from graduate school. I think something that's really cool when you go to grad school is you meet friends for life that you didn't think you'd meet like in your mid or late 20s. In a way, like sometimes I came to Boston, and part of why I was like, I'm here for this 1-year master's program was I was like pretty sure like my life was set, out in Oregon, and I was gonna come here and learn some stuff and then just go back. And I came here, and I've been here like ever since. But one is, I think the friendships, I still am really close with the people that I went to graduate school with. We came from all very different walks of life, and that helped things better, and I think them understand things better, as well, in a way that I think is just like really, really cool. I still reach out to some of my grad school friends that moved far away, and vice versa, for advice or questions on things, just because I know that one of my favorite things ever was when I was a master's student, and 4 of us went to a conference together, which was also like, I didn't know that was something I could do, but I remember like we went together, and it was such like this moment of awe. Like we were both like, oh my God, that person up there talking, we read their paper in class. It was like, we were like at Hollywood for, like people in like developmental psychology, but it was so cool. And it was fun, like sharing that with, with a group of people. And it's funny, like now, like we talk about like those things, but I think the friendships piece is huge. The other thing that I learned in graduate school was where and how I like to work. And so like one thing I've learned about myself, so when I was in college, like where you're supposed to study is like the library, like that's, and like every movie and show you watch, like that's where people go do work. I'm not productive in a library. I am productive in a coffee shop with 1,000 people, and it is really, really noisy. It's not distracting to me, right? I didn't figure that out until I was in graduate school, and so I think things like what works best for me, how I manage my time, I experimented with a couple things like that in grad school, and that's carried over with me into my professional life. So like as a teacher, for instance, I know that I'm the kind of person that likes to grade all of the things at one time. So like I'll sit, being like, what? You know, it's like I'll sit, and I would rather sit for like hours and finish it than do like a couple little by little, right? And I think one of the things before I went to grad school was I felt like I had to do things the way everybody else did, and it just never worked for me. And then when I got to grad school, for whatever reason, I felt like, oh, now I can try these new things, and I did, and I was like, oh, this works, and that doesn't.
Thank you. I'm seeing the time.
Oh no.
Chris, do you want us to ask one more question, or?
Sure. What would you like to know? Anything at all? Think about, I guess maybe thinking about incoming students. I don't know.
Well, I was thinking, Megan, can I ask our hobbies question?
No, I think you should.
Because I feel like we talked about this before we started the interview. And I feel like I need a reminder that I need to be a person outside of a teacher, and maybe other people need that reminder too.
Sure. So like what kinds of things I do?
Yeah, like I know you've told us a little bit about like I'm not an outdoorsy person, but like outdoorsy hobbies, like how do you balance those with your professor life?
Oh, that's a great question. That was hard for me in grad school, too, like finding that balance. But one of the things I think that's just I've come to realize is it's really easy to get burnt out, and like focusing on like all the things that are competing with each other, but like we do our work stuff best when we feel like satisfied with other things going on in our personal life. Like I was really naive when I started graduate school, so going back to that, and I moved to Boston and I was going to be here for 1 year master's program. I also was like, and my life is going on hold. Like I don't know like what I thought, but I thought like I'd live in this bubble of grad school and like, or I would move through the world, that everything else would freeze, right? And I carried that mentality with me into my doctoral program. Like I was like, and my life will stay on hold. And in my doc program, by the way, I met my husband, we got married, we bought a house. I also went to school with a lot of folks that did all those things and also had children. Like your life doesn't go on hold. So I guess remembering that is important, right? Like as you're moving through things. But yeah, I have a lot of things I like to do for fun, and I make the time to do it. So I have at least one day during the week. It's usually on the weekends, but sometimes it'll be on the like during the week, depending on different things, where I don't do any work at all, open my email, like nothing. One of the things that it took me a long time to understand is like the world won't end if like I don't check my email, and that's like sometimes hard to say or admit, right? But then like accepting that, like I make space to do things. So I am a lover of my Google Calendar. I think you both know that. So I like to schedule things. What you might not know is in addition to scheduling student meetings in there and, like meetings I have to take and, like class, I also have, like when I take my hip hop class is in there, right? So I take a weekly hip hop class, not right now, but, like I have. I also put in there, like when I'm going to meet some of my friends for cocktails, cause it's like not less important than work, right? I would say it's more important than work, right? But like having that in there is like this reminder too, like, oh, you have to go do this. You can't just put it off, it's also something I want to do. And so I just try really hard to make the time. But yeah, my hobbies include, I love outdoorsy things. So I love to hike. I love to long distance cycle and mountain bike, and I'm a big skier. I think a theme is I like kind of endurance sports, so that naturally allows me to think a lot about like my scholarship or things, like while I'm doing them. That's not why I do them. It just happens to be something that overlaps like that. I also really like to cook. Something you might not know about me is I take the tea into work, and almost my entire tea ride home after teaching, I think about what is in my fridge and pantry so that I have a plan when I get home to cook. And every day at night, no matter how late I come home, I make a full on like meal. I just like, I love to cook. It's not stressful to me. It's relaxing and fun and like an adventure. I think that's also how I like decompress from the day, you know? So yeah, that's a little bit of me. It was such a delight to chat with you both. I hope that that was informative. Can I ask you one question before we go?
Yes.
So, you know, the audience is, I think, incoming grad students. So if you had like one piece of advice for folks coming into school, like what would you tell them? You want to start, Megan?
Oh, thanks a lot. So Camilla and I have joked before that when we started our program, both of us were like a reality TV show. Like we didn't come here to make friends, like just came here to like win, maybe not win, but whatever. So I think like being open to making friends within the classes and like being really open to meeting new people and just the experiences that you have. I think the last 2 years have like really profoundly changed my life, and being open to those experiences probably would have allowed that change to happen sooner.
Our lives don't go on hold in grad school.
They don't, which is so weird.
Thanks, Megan. What about you, Camilla?
Yeah, I mean, probably to no surprise, I would say really the same thing. I think my grad experience just like improved significantly when Megan and I started, when Megan would drive me, really, is what I should say. When like we had this time to chat, to get food before we went to class, to do assignments together, to go to the library together, like that, I feel like in this busy time when you're like managing 1,000 things, it feels like this is restorative and like makes me feel more excited. I have a thought partner. Like I'm more excited about the work I'm doing, and I'm excited because I get to see my friend.
Oh, that's
I
awesome.
feel the same way.
Well, I want to say that sounds so similar to like what I was saying about graduate school, and I carried that with me into my life as professor leader. So Professor Dobbs, he's a faculty member, you know, also at BU Wheelock. We go to that hip hop class together, you know, and like decompress on things, you know, like together as well. And so like, I think one of the things, you know, in grad school is like finding those relationships and, you know, continuing to support and grow together in a lot of different ways. I'm like excited for the two of you, you know, to continue to see the work you do together, even after BU. So I guess we should say bye, and yeah.
Like the Zoom goodbye, which is
Yeah, the awkwardness. Okay.